As we head towards the end of the year, most people are starting to look at medical aid options. Most medical schemes have announced contribution increases and product changes for 2022. Members have to decide whether they need to remain on their option or change, or even join a new medical aid. We discuss this further now with Leo Dlamini, Bestmed CEO, in this feature brought to you by Bestmed. Mr. Dlamini, a very good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for joining us. So, do you have any advice for people who are considering switching or joining a new medical aid?
Good afternoon, Dudu, and thank you. So, Dudu, most people typically will use a financial criteria to decide whether to upgrade, downgrade, register or not register for a medical aid scheme. Now, while that's a very important aspect of it, it's not all of it. And that, I think, is the reason most people end up being unhappy with their medical aid. Some of the things that we have to consider. For instance, your life stage is very important. So, for instance, if you're a young person, healthy, active, typically don't utilize your health services, you typically don't want a comprehensive plan. So you want your typical hospital plan. But as you progress, you start a family. You want to make sure that your family is covered. For instance, you want to make sure that if you're starting a family, at the time of pregnancy, that you belong to a medical aid scheme. Why is that important? In that if you are not and you register after conception, what typically happens is that you're exposed to underwriting, which then results in your pregnancy and the delivery of your child not being covered. Granted, the child is going to be covered from day one, but you can just imagine, first of all, you lose out on all the maternity benefits that we provide as schemes, but also should there be any complications in your pregnancy, you belong to a scheme, but there's underwriting that excludes those things. Now let's think about a family that then progresses. Now the kids get bigger. So if you're thinking about the size of family and also the age of your kids, very important dynamic to consider. For instance, at Bestmed, we make sure that you only pay for the first 3 child dependents. The rest of your kids can be full members without having to pay additional fees. But also what we've also done is in recognizing that members require support in terms of their young adult kids. What we've said is from 2022, your kids can stay on as adult kids that are paying adult dependent rates, which is almost half. Let me say that again. So your child dependent rate is almost half of your adult dependent. In other words, what I pay for my wife, my spouse, is about 100% more than what I pay for my child dependent. So what we've said is that most schemes typically will, as soon as a child turns 21, that child is regarded as an adult and therefore the fees almost double. But from a Bestmed perspective, what we've decided to do is to creating value, obviously, for my members. We've said we'll extend that from 21 all the way up to 24. And what's more, because we recognize that kids don't get out of the house, sometimes the kids are studying. If the child is a student, we will grant an additional 3 years, making it up to 26 years. So it's another very important consideration. Let's say you then progress in age, you get mature, you start getting to the space where you start needing those complicated, high-cost sort of procedure, what we call non-emergency procedures, we call electives. At that point, you want to make sure that you've done your homework to make sure that some of those procedures like back op, hip replacements are covered in the options that you are in. So there's no point in downgrading away from an option and then find out that the procedure that you need, you actually can't have because of that option. Then, of course, agnostic of the life stage, there's elements that there's people that have health conditions that will permeate any year. So you want to make sure that if you have specific health conditions, that the options you look at provide that cover. Now, granted, there's what we call prescribed minimum benefits that all schemes, all options have to cover because it's according to the Medical Schemes Act. However, some of the conditions that people have sit outside those prescribed minimum benefits, with typical add-ons. So you want to have a look. Things like osteoporosis, eczema, ADD, those sit outside prescribed minimum benefit, and yet they're prevalent in our society. So you want to make sure that as you downgrade, as you change schemes, as you look at those things so that it's fit for purpose, not just the financial. Financial is important, but not just that.
How would you then define preventative care benefits?
Well, it's exactly that. Preventative care benefits are exactly that. These are benefits that are designed, they do two things. The one is they provide the interventions in terms of members' health long before there's complications down the line. Because all we're focused on is medical aid schemes. Specifically, I'll say this for Bestmed, we want you to have your best life. How then do we make sure that you're able to have your best life? By being able to provide benefits that you can utilize without taking advantage of your day-to-day and your savings. It's provided by the scheme so that you can have a look-see and check that you are making sure that you're healthy so that down the line you remain healthy. That saves you in terms of problems down the line, but also what it does is that from a scheme perspective, it makes sure that costs that we don't have to incur are avoided in the long term.
Mr. Dlamini, year-end increases for medical schemes is a hot topic at the moment. So what is your take on the various schemes' increases?
It's a very pointed question, very important given where we are, absolutely. What you would have seen is a lot of trends where schemes are announcing increases, and these are increases announced this year for 2022. What you see a lot of is schemes announcing increases and then deferring those increases for a couple of months. So, for instance, if a scheme says 6% for 2022, but that is deferred, the effective date is 1st of July. Now, that provides some relief for members, but, you know, in July, that 6% kicks in and that happens. So we've seen a lot of that permeate. But there's other important things. For instance, your inflation rate. This is very important. Where is that pegged? Now, the regulator a few months ago put out a circular and said the expected inflation rate is 4.2 according to the Reserve Bank for next year. Try and, at worst case, peg your prices at 4.2. Best case, make it less so that the buying power from your members is not affected. Very important consideration. Now, what we've also done from a Bestmed perspective, we've said we want to give more value to our members. We will not only make sure that we give below inflation increases, we've done 3.9. But what we've also done is we've said the benefit limits that you have as a member, and this is an area that's totally ignored by a lot of people when they look at price. The benefit increase limits that you have, we will increase those by 4.2%. What does that mean? I've increased what you're buying by 4.2%. I've increased your price increase by 3.9. In other words, I've given you more value. We haven't only done that this year, but we've done it 2 years in a row. Because it's important for us that even as you bear the brunt of an increase in price, which is always painful, that you are doing that, at least getting more out of your medical aid, which is more value for your scheme. And that's what we believe we need to do. And that's what we've done. Some of the other schemes have not done that. And it's an important area to consider. Have the benefit limits increased or decreased? And what ratio vis-a-vis the actual contribution increase? Very important consideration.
You previously mentioned cover for chronic conditions. Are there any specific items to bear in mind when it comes to chronic cover?
So again, this is very critical because some of the chronic conditions are covered in your typical prescribed minimum benefits, and one's got to be very, very careful about how those are covered. Let me give you some of the areas where we've picked up a lot of complaints. For instance, depression, which is mental health, and it's become prevalent in our society. It's become so prevalent that just about every second person has some kind of issues with mental health. And we saw that come through in terms of some of the work that we've done with that. So we've decided, and typically what would happen is that people would then be on depression treatments, and they would have it registered as chronic. Those that know, and it's an important point that I'll come back to. But typically, even as you're registered on chronic, at some point during the year, September, October, your limits run out. But this is life-sustaining medication, so you can't not be on it. What we've then decided to do is we've decided to add that to say once your chronic on depression treatment has run out, we will pay for it, not from your day-to-day benefit, not from your savings, but from the scheme benefits, so that because we regard that as life-sustaining. Let me come back to the chronic detail. A lot of people don't know their conditions, whether or not they're chronic or not. And we need to do a lot more work as schemes, but also as members. Just be informed. Some of the conditions that you struggle with, where you have to take medication on an ongoing basis, take the time to understand what it is, contact your medical aid scheme, register that condition so that the medication that you get, the treatment that you get is covered by your chronic benefits, so that you can then get the full benefit of that chronic registration.
And finally, besides what you have already mentioned, what benefit enhancements could Bestmed members look forward to in 2022?
Thanks for that question. So we've done a couple of things, and we've listened, and the industry has sort of been plagued with a lot of complaints over the last few years. And a lot of complaints come from a couple of things. One is your optometry benefits. The other is your co-payments. And we responded to specifically those things. So what we've done is, in terms of optometry benefits, we've increased that by 25%. So we've increased the optometry benefit by up to 25% for 2022. But what we've also done was looked at all our options and decided where we could eliminate the co-payments. Other options we've reduced. So we've significantly reduced and removed some of the co-payments, which is where the pain is. But we've added other things like flash glucose monitoring. Now, diabetes is prevalent in our society. And what you want to do is help members to be able to monitor, and, the best diabetes, if you must have, is one that's monitored and then regulated. So we've made it available. We've also added some extra costs benefits in terms of your orthodontics to make sure that our members. So we've listened to what members have said, and we've come back with our benefits enrichment and our benefits enhancements to make sure that we respond to some of those things.
Mr. Leo Dlamini is the CEO of Bestmed. Thank you very much for that. This feature was brought to you by Bestmed.